Michael Harris boarded the Virginia flight with Emily, his 7-year-old daughter, settling into seat 12. Vanessa Langford, the billionaire CEO, was forced to take 12E when first class malfunctioned. She grimaced at the father-daughter pair in their worn clothes and frayed backpack. While Emily slept against him, Michael quietly activated an old device hidden in his sleeve. At 32,000 feet, 2 F-22s suddenly appeared. Flanking the plane in perfect formation, the pilot announced, "A distinguished passenger has been honored by the United States Air Force." Vanessa turned, stunned, to the man beside her. The morning had started like countless others in the small Richmond apartment that Michael Harris called home, though the word home had taken on different meanings over the past 7 years. The kitchen counter bore the organized chaos of a single parent's life. Emily's medications lined up with military precision, each bottle labeled with dosing times in his careful handwriting. The inhaler positioned exactly where small hands could reach it in an emergency. The backup stored precisely 3 inches to the left. The walls that had once displayed unit photos and commendations now served as a gallery for Emily's artwork. Each drawing signed with a flourishing love. Emily that made every sacrifice worthwhile, every struggle meaningful. Michael stood at the stove preparing Emily's breakfast with the same attention to detail he'd once applied to operational planning. Scrambled eggs with exactly 1 slice of American cheese melted through, not too runny, not too firm. Toast cut into triangles because squares were boring, and circles were for babies according to his daughter's complex food hierarchy. Orange juice diluted with 20% water because full strength sometimes triggered her cough, a discovery made through careful observation over months of trial and error. Every movement was calculated, practiced, refined through thousands of repetitions until care became second nature, love expressed through routine. Emily sat at their small table, a thrift store find that Michael had sanded and refinished until it looked almost new. Her thin shoulders hunched over her latest drawing, brown hair falling across her face as she concentrated with an intensity that reminded him painfully of her mother, back when Sarah had still cared about their family, before the disgrace, before the bankruptcy of their former life, before she'd chosen her new husband's reputation over their daughter's needs. The drawing showed an airplane flying over mountains, stick figures visible through impossibly large windows, one labeled Daddy and one labeled Me with arrows for clarity. "Daddy, will the mountains be bigger than the buildings downtown?" Emily asked, looking up with those impossibly brown eyes that seemed to see straight through him, past the careful facade of normalcy he maintained, straight to the father who would do anything to give her the life she deserved. Her voice carried the slight rasp that had become their constant companion, the reminder that every breath was a small battle in a war they'd been fighting since she was 3 years old. Colorado Springs meant altitude, and altitude meant additional challenges for lungs that already struggled at sea level. But Dr. Morrison was there, one of only 3 specialists in the country working on the experimental treatment that insurance companies dismissed as investigational, that cost more than Michael made in 2 months of construction work. "Much bigger, sweetheart," he replied, setting her plate down with the gentle precision he brought to everything involving his daughter. "Some of them have snow on top even in summer. Can you imagine that? Snow when it's hot outside." Her face lit up with the kind of wonder that made every extra shift worthwhile. Every skipped meal forgotten. Every sacrifice fade into irrelevance. She'd never seen mountains except in pictures, never traveled beyond the careful 100-mile radius their budget allowed. This trip had taken 6 months of saving, of taking work he'd once have considered beneath him, of swallowing pride that had once meant everything and now meant nothing compared to her needs. "Will we see bears?" she asked, fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Maybe from far away," Michael said, though he knew they'd see nothing but the inside of medical facilities and their budget motel. "Bears are very shy." "Good," Emily decided. "I don't want them to eat you." "Who would make my breakfast?" The joke was delivered with 7-year-old seriousness that made him smile despite everything. "I'm pretty sure bears prefer berries to daddies." "But you're not berry-flavored," Emily pointed out with flawless logic. "Unless you've been keeping secrets." Michael checked their documents one more time while Emily finished eating, a habit from years of operational planning where one overlooked detail could cascade into catastrophe. Tickets printed because he didn't trust electronic boarding passes, Emily's medical information sealed in an envelope with emergency contact numbers written in permanent ink, his own identification that told nothing of who he used to be. Colonel Michael Harris had been erased from official records with the same surgical precision that had once made him valuable to his country. Now he was just Michael Harris. Single father. Day laborer. Nobody worth a second glance from anyone who mattered. The apartment around them testified to a life rebuilt from necessity rather than choice. Furniture purchased from thrift stores and yard sales, but maintained with the same attention to detail he'd once applied to mission planning. A bookshelf holding Emily's favorites, alongside a few tactical manuals he couldn't quite bring himself to throw away, hidden behind children's books like guilty secrets. The laptop on the corner desk, ancient by modern standards, but sufficient for helping Emily with homework and occasionally, late at night when she slept, reviewing the electronic warfare techniques that had once been his entire world. Everything clean, organized, functional. A life held together by discipline when everything else had fallen apart. Michael had once commanded Ghost Unit, a designation that didn't appear in any public military records, and never would. They were the ones who fought wars that never made headlines, who prevented catastrophes that the public never knew had been possibilities. Electronic warfare specialists, signals intelligence operators, the kind of soldiers who could turn an enemy's communications network into a weapon against itself. His men had called him Ghost Leader, a title that carried more weight in certain classified circles than any congressional medal. They operated in the spaces between what the public knew about warfare and what actually kept them safe at night. The fall had been as swift as it was calculated. A political scandal involving defense contractors and Senate appropriations had needed a scapegoat, someone high enough to satisfy the media but not so high as to implicate those truly responsible. Michael had been perfectly positioned, successful enough to be credible, classified enough that the real story could never be told. He could have fought back, could have revealed operations and names that would have cleared him, but destroyed dozens of careers and compromised operations that were still protecting American interests. Instead, he'd accepted the discharge papers without protest, watched his security clearance evaporate overnight, his pension disappear into legal limbo, his reputation transform from hero to pariah in carefully orchestrated leaks that painted him as everything he'd spent his life fighting against. Sarah had lasted 6 months after the disgrace. She'd married a soldier, not a disgraced ex-officer working construction and paying lawyers with money they didn't have. The divorce had been brutal in its efficiency. She'd taken the house, the savings, everything except Emily. And that only because her new husband, a real estate developer with political ambitions, didn't want the burden of a sick child whose medical bills could bankrupt a normal family. Michael had signed the custody papers with relief that surprised him. Emily was all that mattered. Emily was everything that mattered. Emily was the only thing that had ever really mattered. Now he worked whatever jobs his body could handle. Construction when his back allowed. Night security when it didn't. Warehouse loading when neither of those were available. The skills that had once protected national secrets, that had once directed operations across 3 continents, now went toward ensuring Emily's medications were always filled, her treatments never missed, her world as stable as he could make it. He'd learned to shop sales with the same strategic precision he'd once applied to supply requisitions, to mend clothes with the same patience he'd once used to repair communication equipment, to cook nutritious meals on a budget that would have been a rounding error in his former unit's operational expenses. "Is Miss Chen coming to watch me?" Emily asked, finishing her breakfast with the careful slowness that meant she was anxious about the trip. Their elderly neighbor had become their lifeline, the grandmother Emily had never known, the only person Michael trusted with his daughter when work demanded his absence. "Not this time, sweetheart. You're coming with me, remember? We're going on an adventure." The consulting opportunity in Colorado had been unexpected. A former colleague who remembered Ghost Leader when everyone else had been ordered to forget, offering a chance that was part charity and part genuine need for skills that hadn't diminished despite their official erasure. 3 days of reviewing electronic warfare protocols for a private defense contractor. Payment in cash. No questions asked about the gap in his resume that swallowed 7 years like a black hole. Emily's face brightened despite her worry. "And we're flying? In a real airplane?" The excitement in her voice made the credit card debt worth it. He'd promised himself he wouldn't touch the emergency card, the one he kept for her medical crises, But this was a different kind of emergency. This was about giving her something beyond survival, something close to the childhood she deserved. A real airplane, he confirmed. You'll be able to see the clouds from above. What do clouds look like from above? She asked, already reaching for her coloring supplies to document this new information. Like snow that forgot to fall, he said, remembering his first flight in a military transport. Young and convinced he was invincible. White and fluffy, and going on forever. They finished their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Emily's inhaler in her right pocket and his left, backup medications in the carry-on, distributed across 3 different compartments in case one got lost. Her favorite stuffed rabbit worn soft from years of comfort carefully placed where she could reach it during the flight. Michael wore his best clothes, which meant his least faded jeans and a button-down shirt that had been new 5 years ago, ironed the night before with military creases that would never quite leave his muscle memory. Emily wore the purple dress Mrs. Chen had made for her birthday, flowers embroidered along the hem with careful stitches that spoke of love in every thread. The ride to Richmond International Airport took 40 minutes in their ancient Honda Civic, a car held together by mechanical knowledge and stubborn refusal to give up. Emily pressed against the window, watching the city wake up, occasionally reporting important observations like a particularly fat pigeon or a dog wearing a sweater. Michael mentally reviewed the consultation materials he'd studied late into the night, electronic warfare protocols that had evolved in the 7 years since his discharge, but still followed patterns he understood in his bones. "Daddy, what if the plane breaks?" Emily asked suddenly, a worry that had apparently been percolating. "Planes are very safe," he assured her. "Safer than cars, actually. They check everything 3 times before flying." 3 times seems like a lot, she said thoughtfully. "Do they check if the wings are still attached? Especially the wings." "Good. Wings seem important for flying." At the airport, Michael lifted Emily onto his shoulders so she could see over the crowds, her delighted laughter worth the protest from his back. They moved through security with practiced efficiency, Michael automatically cataloging exits, defensive positions, potential threats, habits that would never fully fade. Emily charmed the TSA agents with her serious explanation of why her rabbit needed to go through the X-ray machine too, for safety. Meanwhile, across the city in Arlington, Vanessa Langford's morning operated on an entirely different frequency of existence. Her penthouse alarm synchronized with the opening of the Tokyo markets at precisely 4:30, not because she traded, but because she believed in staying ahead of global patterns. Her coffee, imported from a specific plantation in Jamaica she partially owned, brewed automatically at 4:35. By 4:40, she was reviewing overnight reports from her company's international divisions, her mind already processing data faster than most people processed consciousness. At 34, Vanessa commanded more wealth than some small nations. Her company's valuation, approaching $10 billion based on algorithms she'd written, refined, and weaponized for the modern age of warfare. Langford Group didn't make weapons in the traditional sense. No bombs, no bullets, no tangible instruments of destruction. Instead, they created the invisible architecture of modern defense, encryption protocols that had proven unbreakable even by quantum computers, AI systems that could predict terrorist attacks with 97% accuracy, threat assessment matrices that had already prevented 6 major cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. She dressed with the same precision she applied to coding, each element of her appearance calculated for maximum impact. The Armani suit that cost more than most Americans made in a month, tailored to project authority without ostentation. The subtle jewelry that whispered rather than shouted wealth, her grandmother's diamonds reset in modern platinum, a watch that told time in 17 time zones and could access encrypted satellites if necessary. Her platinum blonde hair, maintained at a cost that would seem obscene to anyone who didn't understand that appearance was armor in the battles she fought daily. The call from the airline came as she was entering her Tesla, the autopilot already programmed for the airport. "Miss Langford, we're terribly sorry, but there's been a mechanical issue with the first-class cabin on your flight. We'd like to offer you our highest level of economy seating, or we can rebook you on tomorrow's flight with a full refund and additional compensation." The choice was no choice at all. The mountain conference wouldn't wait, and Vanessa Langford didn't accept delays. She agreed to the downgrade with the kind of controlled fury that would later result in someone losing their job, though she wouldn't personally oversee that particular punishment. People who failed her simply ceased to exist in her professional sphere. Ghosts of inefficiency she never thought about again. Walking through economy boarding felt like anthropological research, observing a culture she'd never had to understand. Families with too many children and not enough discipline. Business travelers whose companies didn't value them enough for premium seats. The elderly moving, with the careful uncertainty of those who'd outlived their confidence. She cataloged them all with the same analytical distance she applied to datasets. Human variables, in an equation she had no interest in solving. When she reached row 12, the sight of the man and child in F made her jaw tighten involuntarily. Everything about them screamed the kind of lower middle-class struggle her parents had taught her to despise. His clothes bore the telltale signs of repeated washing, colors faded to suggestions of what they'd once been. The child's dress was obviously homemade, probably by some well-meaning neighbor. Their backpack, held together with duct tape in places, sat under the seat, like an admission of defeat. She settled into 12E with the kind of controlled grace that made even economy seats look deliberate, pulling out her laptop to review her presentation one final time. The AEGIS-7 system would revolutionize military AI. She was certain of it. 18 months of development, 40 of the brightest minds in technology, and her own singular vision had created something that would change the nature of warfare itself. Michael felt her presence before seeing her. A shift in the air pressure that his trained senses still registered despite years of civilian life. The woman settling into 12E radiated the kind of hostile privilege he'd encountered in Pentagon briefings, where contractors treated warriors like necessary evils, tools to be used and discarded. Her perfume alone probably cost more than their flights, a complex scent that filled the space between them with unspoken judgment. He pulled Emily closer instinctively, a protective gesture that had nothing to do with physical threat and everything to do with shielding his daughter from the contempt he could feel emanating from their new neighbor. Emily, blessedly, was already growing drowsy, her morning medication making her sleepy, as it often did on travel days. She curled against him with the absolute trust of a child who knew that wherever Daddy was, she was safe. "Story, Daddy?" she murmured, already half asleep. Once upon a time, he began quietly, there was a little girl who could paint the sky. The plane reached cruising altitude, with the usual announcements and service routines that Michael ignored with practiced ease. Emily had fallen into the deep sleep of childhood, her head pillowed on his shoulder, her small hand clutching his shirt with the grip of someone who'd learned to hold on tight to what mattered. He watched her with the vigilance of a parent who had learned to read every breath, every shift, every sign of potential distress. 3 hours to Colorado. 3 hours of holding perfectly still so she could rest. 3 hours of being her entire world. His hand moved almost unconsciously to his wrist, fingers finding the edge of the device hidden beneath his frayed cuff. The Ghost Unit transmitter should have been destroyed 7 years ago. Its frequencies dead, its codes meaningless. But Michael had never quite been able to let go of this last connection to who he'd been. Once a month, sometimes more when the weight of invisibility grew too heavy, he would activate it, sending out a brief burst of encrypted data that no civilian equipment could detect or decode. The signal he sent was brief, lasting less than 2 seconds, a tight burst of data that expanded into complex algorithms once received. Authentication codes that had once meant immediate response from the most classified units in America's arsenal. Unit designation that had once commanded resources most people couldn't imagine. Status marker that still, despite everything, read active in the system, because no one had remembered to change it. Or perhaps because someone, somewhere, refused to accept the Ghost Leader was really gone. He didn't know that 17 intelligent satellites registered the transmission simultaneously, that automated systems began cascading alerts through channels that had never actually forgotten Ghost Leader, that somewhere in Cheyenne Mountain, screens lit up with recognition protocols that hadn't been triggered in 7 years. He didn't know that certain people had been waiting, hoping, watching for this exact signal. The F-22s materialized from empty sky like predators revealing themselves, though their intent was far from hostile. They appeared at the commercial aircraft's 7 o'clock position, approaching with the kind of precision that spoke of the highest levels of pilot training. They matched the Boeing speed exactly, maintaining perfect formation at a distance that was close enough to be clearly visible but far enough to avoid any turbulence. Inside the plane, passengers began to notice, pointing and pulling out phones despite regulations, excitement rippling through the cabin like electricity. The pilot's voice, when it came over the intercom, carried a mix of confusion and awe that suggested this was far outside normal procedures. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently being escorted by 2 United States Air Force F-22 Raptors. This is not, I repeat, not a standard procedure, and there is absolutely no cause for alarm. We've been informed that." There was a pause, the sound of muffled communication with ground control, voices raised in what sounded like disbelief. "We've been informed that a distinguished member of our armed forces is being honored with an aerial salute. On behalf of the entire crew, we thank this individual for their service." The fighters held formation for exactly 90 seconds. Michael counted them with the same precision he'd once used to time operations, before peeling away in perfect synchronization, their departure as crisp and professional as their arrival. The cabin erupted in applause and speculation. Passengers craned their necks, looking for someone in uniform, someone who looked like a hero, someone who matched their mental image of military excellence. Nobody looked at the single father in 12F, holding his sleeping daughter, while tears he wouldn't acknowledge gathered in his eyes. Vanessa found herself gripping her armrest hard enough to leave marks, her analytical mind racing through possibilities. The man beside her hadn't moved during the entire display, hadn't acknowledged it, hadn't done anything except hold his daughter slightly closer. But there was something in his stillness, a quality of attention that suggested complete awareness of everything happening around him. She turned to study him properly for the first time, seeing past the worn clothes to the bearing beneath, the scarred hands that spoke of more than construction work, the eyes that tracked everything while appearing to see nothing. "That was quite something," she said, her voice carefully neutral, testing. Michael glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Military likes their ceremonies," he replied quietly. "You sound like you'd know," she pressed. "Everyone knows someone who served." It was deflection. Skillfully done. Emily stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible before settling again. Michael's attention immediately shifted, checking her breathing, her color, her comfort with the kind of hypervigilance Vanessa recognized from her own security details. But this was different. Personal rather than professional, love rather than duty. "Your daughter?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "She's beautiful. She's everything," Michael replied simply. And in those 2 words, Vanessa heard a story she didn't yet understand, but suddenly wanted to. The plane descended into Colorado Springs 40 minutes later, the Rocky Mountains rising to meet them like ancient sentinels. Emily woke as the pressure changed, her hand immediately finding her father's, the practiced response of a child who'd learned to navigate her body's challenges. "Are we there, Daddy?" she asked, voice thick with sleep. "Almost, sweetheart. Look, you can see the mountains." Her face transformed with wonder as she peered past him through the window, and Vanessa found herself watching the child's joy with an unexpected ache in her chest. When was the last time she'd felt wonder at anything? When had she stopped seeing beauty in favor of efficiency? The landing was smooth, passengers immediately beginning their usual shuffle of gathering belongings and impatience. Vanessa stood first, her need to escape the confines of economy overwhelming her curiosity about the man and child beside her. She retrieved her bag from the overhead compartment, her heels clicking authority as she moved into the aisle. Other passengers deferred automatically, recognizing power even if they didn't know its source. She'd taken perhaps 10 steps toward the exit when the forward cabin door opened from the outside, a breach of protocol that made several passengers step back in alarm. The flight attendants looked confused, then suddenly straightened as they recognized the uniform of the man entering. General Thomas Vale entered the aircraft like weather changing, his presence immediately commanding attention even from those who didn't understand military rank. His uniform bore the weight of 40 years of service, ribbons and medals telling stories of conflicts most Americans preferred to forget existed. 2 aides flanked him, their eyes scanning the cabin with professional assessment that marked them as more than standard military personnel. Vanessa's mind immediately went to her defense contracts, wondering if this was about the delayed AI platform, preparing her explanations and deflections. But Vale walked past her as if she didn't exist, his destination clear and purposeful. He stopped at row 12, where Michael was helping Emily with her small backpack, checking that her inhaler was accessible. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as understanding rippled through the space. This was who the fighters had honored. This unremarkable man in worn clothes. This single father who'd spent the flight holding his sick child. "Colonel Harris," Vale said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had ordered men to die and lived with the consequences. "We never got to say goodbye properly." Ghost Unit remembers. Michael stood slowly, Emily's hand in his face composed but something raw flickering behind his eyes. "General," he acknowledged. The single word, carrying years of unspoken history. Vale's weathered face cracked into something between a smile and grief. 7 years, Mike. 7 years of the community waiting for you to break radio silence for real. That signal today, the authentication codes, they lit up boards that have been waiting. Some of us never believed the official story. "This isn't the place, Tom," Michael said quietly, using the familiar name that spoke of shared history beyond rank and protocol. His eyes dropped meaningfully to Emily, who was watching the exchange with the intense attention children brought to adult mysteries. Vale nodded, understanding immediately. "Of course, but the invitation stands. Whenever you're ready, the community owes you more than we can ever repay, but we'd like to try." He turned to Emily, his expression softening remarkably. "You must be the famous Emily. Your father told us so much about you, back when he could still talk to us." Emily studied Vale with that direct gaze that seemed to see through pretense. "He doesn't talk about the old days much," she said seriously. "He says, the best stories are the ones we're living now." Vale's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Your father always was the wisest of us. Take care of him, young lady. He's more important than he lets anyone know." Emily nodded solemnly. "I know, he's my hero. Even if nobody else sees it." The general's aide stepped forward with a folder, but Michael shook his head minutely. "Not now, not here," he repeated. Vale accepted the refusal with grace. "Then at least let us arrange transportation. My car's outside. We'll take a cab, thanks." Emily likes to see the city from ground level. As the military contingent departed, the cabin erupted in excited chatter. But Michael was already moving, lifting Emily with practiced ease, avoiding eye contact and conversations with the skill of someone who'd learned to be invisible despite being seen. They passed Vanessa in the jet bridge, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw in his gaze not pride or satisfaction, but a kind of resigned acceptance, as if being seen was a burden he'd learned to bear rather than seek. "Colonel," she said, the word feeling strange on her lips. He paused, Emily's arms around his neck. "Just Michael," he corrected gently. "That other person doesn't exist anymore." But Emily shook her head against his shoulder. "Yes, he does," she said firmly. "He just wears different clothes now." The Mountain Strategic Defense Conference represented the bleeding edge of military thinking, where theoretical met practical in ways that determined the future of warfare. Held in a secure facility near Cheyenne Mountain, it brought together the brightest military minds and the most innovative private sector technologists. Vanessa had presented here 5 times before, each appearance cementing her reputation as the wonderkind of defense technology. This year's presentation on Aegis 7 was meant to be her masterpiece. The AI system could predict and counter threats before they materialized, reading the digital noise of the world like ancient priests read omens. She stood at the podium in a charcoal suit that spoke of serious intent, her presentation flowing with practiced ease. Aegis 7 doesn't just respond to threats, she explained to the audience of generals, admirals, and defense contractors. It anticipates them. It thinks like an adversary, but faster, without the human limitations of emotion or ethics, that slow response time. In our simulations, it's defeated every attack vector with a success rate of 98.7%. "May I ask a question?" The voice came from the back of the auditorium, quiet but carrying authority. Michael stood in civilian clothes that looked even more worn under the harsh auditorium lights, a visitor's badge clipped to his shirt pocket. General Vale, from his front row seat, made a gesture that silenced the security personnel who'd started moving. "The floor recognizes our special advisory consultant," he said, the title deliberately vague but carrying weight. "Your algorithm assumes adversarial behavior follows predictable patterns based on historical data," Michael said, walking slowly down the aisle. "But what happens when the enemy knows you're watching? When they feed you false patterns for 6 months, letting your AI learn their decoy behavior while preparing something entirely different?" He reached the front of the room, his presence somehow commanding despite his casual appearance. "In electronic warfare, we call it poisoning the well. Your AI is brilliant, Miss Langford, but it's learning from a dataset that any competent signals intelligence unit could contaminate." The room had gone completely silent. Admiral Chen from Pacific Command leaned forward. "Colonel Harris, are you suggesting the entire AI defense paradigm has this vulnerability?" "I'm saying that any system that learns from enemy behavior can be taught to learn the wrong lessons," Michael replied. "Miss Langford's technology is remarkable, genuinely groundbreaking, but it needs what we called a doubt protocol. A secondary system that assumes its primary learning is compromised and looks for what it's been trained not to see." Vanessa felt her carefully constructed presentation beginning to unravel, but her mind was already racing ahead, seeing the flaw he'd identified. "You're suggesting the entire learning model could be compromised through deliberate misinformation? In Ghost Unit, we ran operations specifically designed to train enemy AI on false patterns," Michael explained. 6 months of fake signals, false communications, manufactured data streams. When their systems had fully integrated our deception as baseline reality, we'd strike with something they literally couldn't see coming because their machines had learned not to see it. "That would require essentially building 2 competing AI systems," Vanessa said, her mind already mapping the architecture. "One that learns and one that doubts what it learns." Michael met her eyes for the first time since entering the room. "Welcome to the paradox of electronic warfare, Miss Langford. The moment you trust your intelligence completely is the moment you've already lost." General Vale stood. "Perhaps Miss Langford and Colonel Harris should continue this discussion in a classified setting." As the room emptied, Vanessa found herself face to face with Michael. "You destroyed my entire pitch in 3 minutes," she said. But there was admiration in her voice. "I improved it," he corrected gently. "Your technology could change everything, but only if it learns to doubt itself." "Where's Emily?" she asked suddenly. Michael's expression softened. "With General Vale's wife. They've met before. Margaret makes cookies that Emily insists are magical." The secure briefing room was 3 levels underground, its walls lined with copper mesh. Vanessa's team had been working for 6 hours trying to implement Michael's doubt protocol. The code sprawled across multiple screens, elegant but somehow still missing something essential. Michael sat quietly in the corner, Emily on his lap, working through a coloring book while he occasionally glanced at the screens. She'd returned from her time with Mrs. Vale covered in cookie crumbs and stories about the General's dogs. "It's not working," Vanessa finally admitted. "The 2 systems keep reaching the same conclusions." Michael stood, settling Emily carefully in his chair. "May I?" He moved to the keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys with surprising speed. The code he wrote was different, less elegant but brutally efficient. "You're teaching them to doubt the wrong things," he explained. "They're doubting the data, but not the framework for interpreting the data." He pulled up a simulation. "This is based on a real operation from 6 years ago. The enemy fed us 17 months of false data, perfect in every way, except one tiny detail. They forgot that their fake communications didn't account for local prayer times. 5 times a day, their fake traffic continued while their real operators were at prayer. The absence of absence, we called it." The simulation ran, and suddenly, AEGIS, 7's doubt protocol activated, flagging patterns everyone else had missed. The room erupted in excited chatter. "It's not about finding what's wrong," one engineer said excitedly. "It's about finding what's too right." Michael nodded, stepping back from the keyboard. "In Ghost Unit, we had a saying. Perfect intelligence is always a lie, because reality is never perfect." He returned to Emily, who looked up from her coloring with a smile. "Did you fix it, Daddy?" "Just help them see it differently, sweetheart." Vanessa watched the interaction, something tightening in her chest. Your daughter seems remarkably composed for a child in such a secure facility. She's been in places like this before, Michael said carefully. When she was younger, Emily looked up. I was 3. Daddy used to work in a mountain like this. But then bad people lied about him, and we had to leave. Mommy left too, but that's okay because she wasn't very nice anyway. The casual delivery of such devastating information made Vanessa's throat close unexpectedly. Actually, Vanessa said, making a decision that surprised her. I'd like to hear more. Perhaps over dinner? To thank you both. Emily's face lit up. Can we go somewhere with mac and cheese? Michael looked between his daughter and Vanessa. Miss Langford probably has more sophisticated tastes, but Vanessa was already pulling out her phone. I know a place that does truffle mac and cheese. If you're interested, the restaurant occupied that perfect middle ground between upscale and family-friendly. They sat in a corner booth, Emily beside her father Vanessa, across from them feeling unexpectedly nervous. She'd negotiated billion-dollar contracts with less anxiety than she felt watching Emily carefully navigate her inhaler before the meal, Michael's practiced hands helping without making it seem like help. You have very pretty hair, Emily said suddenly, looking at Vanessa with the directness only children could manage. It's like Elsa's from Frozen. Vanessa touched her platinum blonde bun self-consciously. Thank you, though I suspect Elsa's requires less maintenance. Emily giggled. Daddy says your hair probably costs more than our rent. Michael's face flushed with embarrassment. Emily, that's not appropriate dinner conversation. But Vanessa found herself laughing. Genuinely laughing for the first time in months. Your daddy's probably right. It's rather ridiculous when you think about it. Why don't you have any kids? Emily asked with devastating honesty. Don't you like them? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vanessa could feel Michael tense, ready to redirect his daughter, but she held up a hand. I never thought I'd be very good at it, she admitted. My parents believed children should be efficient and productive, not loved just for existing. They sent me to boarding school when I was 6, and I saw them perhaps 3 times a year after that. Emily's face scrunched in confusion. That's silly. Kids don't have to do anything to be loved. They just have to be kids. Right, Daddy? That's right, sweetheart. Love isn't something you earn. Your parents were wrong, Emily announced with certainty. You would probably be a good mom if you tried. You just need practice. The innocence of the statement shattered something in Vanessa's carefully constructed armor. Michael spoke gently. In combat, we called it the warrior's paradox. The best fighters weren't the ones with nothing to lose. They were the ones with everything to lose who chose to fight anyway. Love doesn't make you weak. It makes you fierce in ways that matter. Is that why you didn't fight back? Vanessa asked. When they scapegoated you, because of Emily, Michael's hand found his daughter's. They could take my rank, my reputation, my future, but they couldn't take her. Fighting back would have meant depositions, trials, media attention. Emily was already sick, already dealing with the divorce. She needed stability. He paused. Hand of places. Besides, the truth would have compromised operations, put other ghosts at risk. My honor wasn't worth their lives. Emily looked up at her father. Then, back at Vanessa. Daddy says honor isn't what other people think of you. It's what you know about yourself when nobody's watching. When Emily excused herself to the restroom, Michael's expression darkened. She's dying, he said quietly. Not immediately, but her lungs are deteriorating. 5 years if we're lucky, maybe 7 with new treatments I can't afford. Vanessa's mind was already calculating. Langford Group has excellent medical coverage. If you were a full-time consultant, I won't take charity. Especially not for her. She needs to see her father earn their life, not beg for it. It wouldn't be charity, Vanessa insisted. You saved my entire presentation today. The doubt protocol concept alone is worth millions. Emily returned, soon covered in chocolate ice cream. As they prepared to leave, she tugged on Vanessa's designer jacket. Will we see you again? I'd like that, Vanessa said, meaning it. The partnership proposal sat on Michael's kitchen table for 3 days before he opened it. The apartment was small but meticulously clean, Emily's drawings covering one wall, her medications organized on the counter with military precision. The contract Vanessa had sent was generous beyond reason, with medical benefits that would cover Emily's treatments, educational provisions, and a salary that seemed impossible. The handwritten note gave him pause. This isn't charity. This is recognition of value that others failed to see. Your country failed you. I won't. Emily found him reading it, climbing onto his lap. Is that from Miss Vanessa? She likes you, Daddy. It's complicated, sweetheart, but you're both lonely, Emily said simply. And lonely people should help each other not be lonely anymore. Michael called the next morning. I have conditions. They met at her office. First condition, Michael said. I remain a ghost. No public announcements. Expected. Next, Emily comes first. Always. Agreed. Third, I want access to your development lab after hours for personal projects related to her condition. Vanessa leaned forward. You're trying to solve it yourself. I have a better idea. Langford Group needs a medical technology division. You head it. Full resources. That's not what I'm asking. It's what Emily deserves. What other children like her deserve. Fine, he said. But I want something else. Once a week, you have dinner with us. Emily needs to see that strong women exist. The announcement of Michael's honorary restoration came without warning, delivered by General Vale at a Pentagon ceremony. The truth was finally told. 7 years late, Ghost Unit's existence was acknowledged. Michael's sacrifice reframed as heroism rather than disgrace. Emily sat in the front row, wearing a dress Vanessa had quietly purchased. When Michael was called forward, he moved with the bearing of the soldier he'd never stopped being. But when it came time for speeches, he did something unexpected. My daughter would like to say something, he said, lifting Emily to the podium. Emily looked out at the room full of brass and politicians. My daddy doesn't like speeches. He says actions matter more than words. So I want to say the words for him. Thank you for remembering that he's a hero. He never forgot, and neither did I. But mostly, thank you for letting him come back. Not to the army, but to himself. He smiles more now. The applause was thunderous. Michael's eyes found Vanessa's across the room, and she felt tears she hadn't authorized slipping down her cheeks. 6 months had passed since that first flight. Vanessa stood outside the apartment door, holding wine and Emily's favorite ice cream. These weekly dinners had become the cornerstone of something none of them quite had words for yet. The door opened before she could knock, Emily grinning up at her. Daddy said you'd be exactly on time. You're always exactly on time. The apartment had changed subtly. A few of Vanessa's books on the shelves, her spare laptop charger by the kitchen counter, a photo from the Pentagon ceremony framed beside Emily's drawings. After dinner, Emily asleep on the couch. The adults talked quietly over wine. We've been dancing around this for months, Michael said. I know. I'm terrified. Good. Terror means it matters. You're already family, Vanessa. We're just waiting for you to realize it. I love you, she said. Both of you. Emily's voice came from the doorway. Finally. Can we go home now? All of us? A year after that first flight, the Langford Harris Medical Research Center held its grand opening. Emily cut the ribbon, her breathing assisted by a prototype device her father had helped design, funded by the company Vanessa had built. No regrets? Vanessa asked Michael in his new lab. How can I regret anything that led here? As they walked out together, Vanessa thought about that flight. About the man she'd dismissed in seat 12F. Sometimes the best things in life came from being profoundly wrong. Sometimes a ghost was exactly what a lonely woman needed. Sometimes a little girl's wisdom could reshape worlds. And sometimes, everyone who ignored the single dad in 12F needed that wake-up call. That moment of recognition, that value doesn't announce itself with fanfare, but sits quietly beside you, waiting for you to see that the greatest strength might look like vulnerability, that love wasn't weakness, but the source of all meaningful power.